Hi, I'm Mandy Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer. I was recently asked a question of whether or not property managers must deliver the agency law pamphlet to landlords and tenants. And the answer is a simple one. The answer is yes. The agency law defines seller to include landlords and defines buyer to include tenants. So when the agency law requires that the agency law pamphlet be delivered to sellers and to buyers, that includes landlords and tenants. So the agency law pamphlet must be delivered to your client, whether you're and a party on the other side of the transaction, as the case may be, whether they're clients related to a sale or parties related to a lease. But what I really wanted to talk about on this video is the importance of making sure that you as a real estate broker clarify to the parties in the transaction, might be your client, it might be a party on the other side of the transaction, who you represent. Remember that the delivery of the agency law pamphlet, although that's a requirement of the agency law, it's intended as backup information. The agency law pamphlet does not identify who you represent. There's nowhere on the agency law pamphlet that you're supposed to write, I represent buyer or I represent seller. The agency law assumes that you have that communication with your client, and then it requires you to document that writing in any purchase and sale agreement. To document that information in any purchase and sale agreement, or in a property management context in the lease agreement. So brokers, when you are talking to a seller about selling their home, you certainly will disclose to your seller up front in the course of your conversation that you will represent the seller exclusively. And then when you put the listing agreement in front of them, paragraph 2, right up front of the listing agreement, talks about the potential that you'll become a dual agent. Have that conversation with your seller. Let them know what it means to be a dual agent. For goodness sake, most sellers actually anticipate that you may become a dual agent. Why are they hiring you to sell their home if they don't want you to go out and sell their home, right? When you're representing a buyer, if the buyer walks into your open house, you're the listing agent, you're holding an open house, your name is on the sign in front of the house, you hand your business card when they walk in. Although it seems obvious to you that you're representing the seller, communicate that information to the buyer. If the buyer is interested in purchasing the house, make sure you communicate to the buyer, I'm happy to write this offer for you. I represent the seller exclusively. You will be without representation in this transaction. Unless you want to be a dual agent, unless the buyer wants you to be a dual agent, in which case you would have to sign a buyer agency agreement with that buyer first before writing the offer. Or maybe you are just working with a buyer, you didn't encounter them in your own open house, you know this buyer from some other opportunity, and you're simply showing them property. Make sure you have explained to them who you represent. Maybe and hopefully you've signed a buyer agency agreement with them. If so, again, there's a provision in the buyer agency agreement that talks about the potential for dual agency. Explain to the buyer that you will become a dual agent if the buyer wants to purchase a home that you have listed. All of these are conversations that brokers know frontwards and backwards. It's integral to the job that every broker performs, who you represent. But make sure that you're communicating that clearly to your client. And remember that delivery of the agency pamphlet is absolutely essential and required, either before your client signs an agency agreement, that would be a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement, or signs either an offer or a purchase and sale agreement. The delivery of the pamphlet must be made, but remember, most importantly, that the pamphlet is just backup information. Your communication to your client about who you represent is what the client is going to rely upon. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.